I am an alcoholic. My home group is the Thursday night study group in Fort Lauderdale, and my name is Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. It was 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Wow. Crazy. Well, fortunately, for any of you who are yous, is that a word? Yous? Any of yous? No? It is now. I always recap anyway, so I do that for a couple of reasons. I do that for a guy like Greg who walks in the room. He doesn't have to hear a conversation about step 6, which would be completely out of context for anybody who's new to Alcoholics Anonymous. But I do it for me as well because, I sometimes can jump into a conversation on step 6 and without the context, without all of the steps that came before, it is out of place because what we're about to start talking about is, a conversation where we're employing God's help to bend our will towards His. And, I have still to this day, absent the first step, no desire to do that very often. I shouldn't say, no, there are some times when I have a sincere, genuine desire, but really, if it wasn't for the first step, I don't think I would apply myself to what we're going to be talking about this evening as diligently as the program asks, and as diligently as I often find myself doing. And so we come into Alcoholics Anonymous. I know I did. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and it took me a little while, but I got some information. I don't know about most of you, but when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, the reason why it took a little while is because one of the things that I didn't know about myself is I'm not a very good listener. And so if you're not a very good listener in AA, you will have the experience of being here, making up stuff about what this is and what's going on and what this is about. And if you're not listening carefully, you'll find yourself in the position that I was in. And that is that what I made up about what AA is and what all of this was about had absolutely nothing to do with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Had zero to do with it. I went to meeting after meeting after meeting and had a very vague idea of what my purpose for being here was. And it wasn't until a couple of old timers, and that's part of the problem, by the way. Part of the problem is I was 19 when I got sober, 20 when I got here, and old timers could hardly get my attention. Old timers just didn't. They just had a very difficult time getting my attention as a young person. So I didn't listen very well, and I didn't listen very well to the very people who had the information that I needed in order to save my life. And so I found myself getting a very slow start in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, but eventually did get a start. And so what happened to me is I'm sitting down listening to a couple of guys who know something about the big book, and they're talking about hours of the body, obsession of the mind, the doctor's opinion in the text Alcoholics Anonymous, which I had never even read before. It has escaped me. I don't read books from the Roman numeral pages in the front. It's not where I start. I read them from page 1. And if you do that with the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, you're going to miss some very important information. And the information that I missed, which, look, I was clear when I got here that my life wasn't working. I was clear that I was in AA because my life was crap. It was in the toilet. Almost like that. I mean, most people who come to Alcoholics Anonymous hit AA on the way down. I actually hit AA on the way up because I came to AA from prison. So I was hitting AA on the way up. I came from prison to the very first group I went to, the very first weekend I was there were some folks who lived on the beach in Boca Raton who had a barbecue out there and invited everybody from the group, including me. Right? I'm like five. I'm like oh no, it was like 8 days. I'm like 8 days out of prison, and I'm on the beach at a barbecue. So I felt like I was moving up in the world as a newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous. But most people come to Alcoholics, and I had a year sober also, because I'd been incarcerated for that stretch. Most people find Alcoholics Anonymous on their way down. And we're here because our lives are completely broken. And we don't know why they're broken. And that was my problem. I was here because my life was broken, but I thought my life was broken meant that, I'm powerless over alcohol. I can't drink or do anything else anymore. And I need to go to AA in order to make that happen. That was the extent of what I knew about why I was here. And what the doctor's opinion in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous put in context for me is that that's not it. That's not the picture. The reason why my life was in the spot that it was in is because when I drink alcohol, my body reacts differently than most people who drink alcohol. My body reacts with a physical craving or demand for more once I start to drink. I cannot control my drinking once I start to drink. So once I put one or two in me, I am gone. I am off to the races. And despite that fact, and despite even my having some hints to that reality in my life, I could not, for the life of me, not take a drink. Could not drink. I was let out of jail, sent to a probation office. The probation officer told me, they scheduled an appointment for me for 30 days later with my probation officer. And because my charges included some possession of drug charges, they gave me a heads up. It's a really cool thing that the probation officer did the day I got out of jail. Hey, because of your charges, there's no question they're going to drug test you on your very first visit. Good tip, right? That's a great tip. If you can't use drugs on probation, that's a great tip to have. I made it 28 days. I could not hold out 2 more days because for 28 days my mind was working on me, looking forward to, it doesn't matter whether I'm drinking or not drinking, my mind always seems to be about drinking or not drinking, and I just couldn't make it 2 more days. I just couldn't make it. And so I can't control my drinking once I start, but I can't stop on my own either. I knew I was going to prison if I violated that probation. And by the way, that is the probation that I violated that did send me to prison. So I knew that this was the cannonball that I was getting, the cannon that I was getting into, and I couldn't avoid it. I knew what was happening, and I could not. That's how powerful this powerlessness is. That's how powerful alcohol is, that I cannot avoid it, even though the consequences are great and I am fully aware of them. But just before taking a drink, something happens in my mind that either lessens the prevalence of these consequences or I'm able to sort of sort out. There's some worm up here in my brain that says, nobody's going to know. It's just tonight. It always seems the way it gets me. Nobody's going to know. It's just tonight, right? There's zero experience in my life that says I could drink just tonight and not continue the next day and the next day. I have no experience that matches up with that. Yet just before taking a drink, that's what I believe. I believe something that's not true. I believe a lie. I cannot see the truth just before taking a drink. I am absolutely powerless over alcohol. That's my problem. And that's what the doctor's opinion puts in context. AA's solution to that problem is a spiritual experience. A complete rearrangement of ideas and attitudes that are the driving forces of our lives. And the way that we have a spiritual experience in AA is through the 12-step process on the wall, right? It's actually not on the wall. It's not on the wall. That's not the 12 steps. That's an outline of the 12 steps. The 12 steps are a set of directions in the text Alcoholics Anonymous. This is, if this was the 12 steps, then step 10, well, I guess we'll talk about that at step 10. But that's not the 12 steps. That's just the bullet list. That's just the outline of what we're going to do. The actual directions, the actual instructions for how to recover from alcoholism are in the rest of the text Alcoholics Anonymous. So I believed that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Here's the thing. I was a believer when I got to AA. I was already a believer. I wasn't a believer when I stopped drinking. But very shortly after, I met somebody who opened up the possibility of a power greater than myself being the answer to my problem. So by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I thought I had already done steps 2 and 3. So let's move on, please, to step 4. But without step 1, I actually hadn't done steps 2 and 3. It's actually not possible to do steps 2 and 3 without doing step 1. But at more than a year sober, when I finally understood that I was powerless, now all of a sudden, this AA thing that I had been going to came into frame. Now all of a sudden it started to make sense. I get it now. I am powerless. You have a power. You found a power through this process that has enabled you to live without alcohol, which is, if you think about it, is a miracle for any alcoholic. For any real alcoholic, being able to stay free of alcohol is an absolute miracle, right? And you folks found a way through this process to be free of the obsession for drinking. Now, free of the obsession for drinking. There has not ever been a time before coming to AA where I was, even when I was sober and clean, if you want to get technical, there wasn't a single time before AA that when I was clean and sober, I was ever free. I was never free. If I was not drinking, I was thinking about either drinking or not drinking. I was never free. Sobriety always looked like fighting the temptation, avoiding the people, places, and things. It always involved a plan for me not to drink. If that's all Alcoholics Anonymous was offering, knowing what I know now, you could keep it. But what Alcoholics Anonymous is offering is complete freedom from the obsession to drink. That's what I've experienced. Complete freedom. Alcoholics Anonymous has shown me a way of life that has brought real power that doesn't just allow me to stay sober one day at a time. It has given me complete freedom of the obsession to drink. I can go down the beer and wine aisle at Publix with my wife and not go, I can, the entire time that I've been sober, with the exception of about a year and a half that I lived with another sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've had a full bar in my home the entire time that I've been sober. I have no desire to drink it. It's either been my brothers or my parents or my girlfriends or my wife's, they're people who drink. There's always been liquor in my home. And so I'm not saying that you should have liquor in your home as a newcomer. I'm just saying that that's freedom. For an alcoholic to live sober with booze in my home is freedom. I have complete freedom from the obsession to drink. That's the cool thing about AA. This isn't about sitting on our hands fighting the obsession to drink every single day of our lives. Admittedly, it is like that for some for varying lengths of time in the beginning, but that's not the result. That's not the promised result of the program Alcoholics Anonymous. The promised result of the program Alcoholics Anonymous is complete freedom or liberation from the obsession to drink. That's what a power greater than myself could do.
It's true control.
I guess so, but it's not control.
Well,
Control. I get technical with the terms. So when you say control, I always take that to being able to control my drinking, right? So, but it's freedom from the obsession. Yes.
better way to say it. No problem.
So given that that's the solution, right? That's AA's solution is a transformation. Chapter 2 put it like this: ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are cast aside, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. That's the promise of the 12 steps, right? And so based on the fact that I'm powerless, and you folks in AA have found real power by doing this, I believe that it's possible for me to have a spiritual experience and live free from alcohol as well. And that was step 2. Step 2 wasn't about believing in God. I thought it was. I was all hung up on, in steps 2 and 3, I was always all hung up on God. Whether I believed or didn't believe, that's always the hang up. It's almost like if we changed God to Pookie, everybody would be just fine. Because nobody has a problem with Pookie, right? I don't know what Pookie is. I just made it. I made it up. Somebody told me it was in a movie somewhere, but I don't. That's not where I got it from. But it doesn't have anything to do with. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with believing in God. It has more, or let's put it this way, because it does, right? There's no way around it. It does have to do with believing in God, but it has more to do with giving up my current beliefs about myself, God, and the world around me. Has more to do with giving up how I think it is than it has anything to do with believing anything. That's why AA is not specific about what you have to believe. We don't care what you believe. The only question is, do you believe? Right? Because if you believe that it's possible that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity, if you take these steps, then we say, come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's do it. Right? And my sponsor invited me to do step 3. And step 3 wasn't the altar call that I had done the months before. Step 3 was a decision to go through with those steps so that I might find the spiritual experience in step 12 that's promised. Have the spiritual awakening that can restore me to sanity. So in step 3, I'm choosing in. Now, this is an important choice though, right? It's a big choice. I'm choosing into what? I'm basically saying, look, my life run my way. My life run the way that I've been doing it for up till now hasn't worked out too well. So I'm fired. Like it's like really, literally, I have to get that committee, that we always talk about in our open discussion meetings, that committee had to get together and fire the head asshole who was running the show. I'm sorry, don't curse. Yeah, I just can't even help it sometimes. And I'm the head hole, right? So like that. So the committee had to get together and say, look, you're fired. We got this other guy who's all powerful and all knowing, and he's now in charge, right? And that was basically what I was doing. And so think about what this decision is. Because this decision is that for the rest of my life, I'm going to seek God's will for my life. Now, you don't have to worry just yet about how to do that. Because I didn't know how to do that. How do you do that? I don't know how to do that, right? Don't worry about it. That's what the rest of the steps are for. The rest of the steps are the way that we're going to do the thing that we're turning over in step 3. But step 3 is a decision to seek God's will for my life because my will has done nothing but screw it up, right? And so we've changed the problem. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, my problem was booze. My problem was that I was powerless. My problem was I had a lack of power. I did not have a power in my life that was bigger than alcohol, right? And now, in order to find that power, my problem is selfishness and self-centeredness. The big book sort of guided us right through there. That, look, my life now depends on receiving direction from a power greater than myself. And here's the problem. And here's the problem that step 3 and the rest of the steps are designed to fix. I don't know the first thing about how to live my life any other way. I don't have a clue. So I'm deciding in step 3 to follow this plan that you folks promised will lead me to this desired result. I don't even necessarily have to believe you, right? I can believe you only a little bit. Okay, he says he did it and it worked. She says she did it and it worked. She said, oh, I don't see how. But okay, right? You could be there. That could be the extent of your faith or belief in this thing. But from there, if we make a decision that you're in and practice these principles, you'll get results. That's why I think the genius of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's why they don't get hung up on trying to prove to anybody that God is. Because we don't have to prove it up front. Just have the smallest amount of trust and faith in the people in Alcoholics Anonymous and do what those steps say. And there will be evidence in your life that God exists. We don't need to prove it to you, right? And besides, we are the worst people to teach who God is to people. It seems that God is always better at teaching who he is than any of us, right? And that's what the program allows us to do. And yes, that's all completely subject to interpretation, but it's a fact, right? God will reveal himself to you in the process. And your process won't look exactly like mine. The steps we take could be exactly the same, and your process won't look like. You will struggle with things that I got over in early sobriety, and I will be doing things in late sobriety that you got over in your first week. It'll be, there's no way that our recoveries will ever look the same, but the process that we take to get there will be. So we decide that we're in, and then if you have a sponsor like mine, he says, we'll see. Because, I don't know about you, but my sponsor saw me coming. He had 100 Brians get through step 3 before he met me. And most of them, they said they're in, and then they didn't do anything else. Or they drugged their feet. Or they didn't, they didn't follow through. I don't know what it is about alcoholics that we don't like to follow through, but he certainly had my number. I am not a follow-througher kind of person. I am a decider and then do nothing. That's my MO, right? And so that's kind of why I was stalled for so long in Alcoholics Anonymous, because my MO, my whole life, was to try to figure out what is the least amount that I can do and still get out of this alive. You know what I mean? Like that was kind of how I didn't know that about myself. I wasn't consciously doing it. It was just kind of how I lived my life. And so when I chose in, and my sponsor and I did the 3rd step prayer, and we said we were in, my sponsor's response was, we'll see. And he showed me how to do a 4th step right out of the big book. And he said, if you come back with this complete, I'll know you were serious. I'll know that you have made a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God. Because the first step in making a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God is step 4. That's why right after step 3 it says next and at once we do step 4, right? That's why the language is like that, because that's the validation. There's no validation if we stay on step 3. Believe me, my commitment to seek God's will for my life wavers and varies from day to day. It has never been steady in the entire time. This is, when they say that we are not saints in how it works, they ain't lying. We are not saints. Because at different times in my life, the truth is, I always I put this in a bad light sometimes. I act like sometimes I'm doing this whole thing against my will all the time. That's actually not true either. Sometimes I'm perfectly happy to do it. Sometimes I'm absolutely in sync with what this program is asking me to do, and I find it effortless and easy and even thrilled to be participating and doing it. And sometimes I am dragging my feet and stomping and so my commitment to that will waver over time, right? That's not taking my will back. We hear in AA, I made a decision in step 3, but then I took my will back. I understand what we're communicating when we say that, but when we're saying that, we're saying it because we recognize, is there any way we can get the air conditioning back on? Is it just me that's hot?
No.
Oh, okay. When we're saying that, like when I find, anytime I found myself saying something along the lines of, I took my will back, right? When did I ever say that? I said that when I recognized that some thought or action that I took was outside of what I see God's will for me as being, right? Where does that recognition come from? It comes from a desire to seek and do God's will, right? So even when I say that I'm taking my will back, right, that whole thought process that I recognize that something is outside of God's will is in itself only exists because I've made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. It's not step 3. The truth of the matter is, if you've taken step 3 and you've moved on to step 4, you better settle in to the idea that in this program, we're going to inventory. And then we're going to inventory, and we're going to inventory, and we're going to inventory, and we're going to inventory. And that's what that recognition, when I notice the thoughts and actions outside of God's will for me, right? When I notice those things, that's literally what I'm doing, is inventorying. I'm actually recognizing what's out of place in my life as far as what God's will is. That here is God's will for me, and here's my thinking and actions and attitude, and that's not, thank you. So we did the inventory. We talked 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, extensively about the benefits of sharing that inventory with another person. I always talk about how, at this point in 4, 5, 6, and 7, when we start talking about these steps, there's two contexts in which we talk about them. And by the way, we have two textbooks that sort of approach the steps in two contexts. The big book is a set of directions for how to do the steps, how to work the steps, how to get through the steps. What is the specific action that I'm supposed to take? And the 12 and 12 is sort of a look at what it's actually like to practice these principles in all of our affairs. What it's actually like to be in step 10, 11, and 12 with respect, because step 10, if you're new, I'll just clue you in right now. When we get to step 10, you know what we're going to say it is? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 every single day, right? That's the we usually wait until we're at step 10 for that, right? But the truth of the matter is, when you get to step 10, all step 10 is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 every single day, right? So we learn how while we're working the steps, so that we know what the way AA's way of life is when we get to these steps that we implement in our life every day. And so there are two contexts. The first context is like taking that first written inventory and learning how to inventory myself, through the context of AA's inventory in the big book, right? That's the one that I like. That's the one that I use. That you can use other ones as well. But I always just feel like if you're in AA and AA's got a textbook, why would you use a Hazelden guide? I mean, I don't have anything against Hazelden. The big book has directions for how to take an inventory, and it is AA's textbook. It just seems, as long as I'm going to be in AA, if you want to be in BB or HZ or something like that, I understand taking another inventory. But AA's got a textbook that has specific instructions for how to take an inventory. And then it also asks us right away to share that inventory with another human being. Because when I share that inventory with another human being, somebody that I know, somebody that's in my life, in my case it was my AA sponsor, which is always a good choice, I'm now accountable to everything that I've done and thought, and all of the intricacies of that way of thinking and the paradigm that my life was in is now exposed to somebody who knows it. Because I am really, what I'm really, really good at? I am really, really good at seeing the truth about myself and then the next day completely ignoring it. That's what I'm good at, right? And I have multiple experiences in sobriety where I've seen something about myself in inventory and have not shared it with another human being, and I can completely rationalize it away given enough time, right? The purpose of the fifth step is so that I don't do that. The purpose of the fifth step is that once it's out of my mouth into somebody, I'm looking at somebody in the eye and sharing it with them, that person is in my life. I'm now called up to those behaviors and attitudes and actions in a way that I'm not if it's just in my head. That fifth step is ultra important, not just when we're doing it the first time after our first fourth step. It's just as important in step 10 as I'm trying to practice these principles every day in my life. Now, I have to admit to you, I'm a lot better at talking about this stuff than I am at practicing it, right? Because that's the one I want to leave out. Because I don't want to be accountable to some of the things that I've written, right? I don't want to. I think I do at first, and then I would rather not, right? So if enough time passes between inventorying it and discussing it with somebody, I won't. And so it's an important part. I make progress when I'm doing all of the steps, and I can see how I've impeded my progress by leaving important ones out. Particularly sharing what I find in my inventory with my sponsor or another person in AA. It's often not even my sponsor. The guy I call my sponsor today, I don't talk to that often. Today it's usually my closest sponsee. It's usually the person in AA that I'm closest to at the time is usually the one that would hear that confession, that I would share that with. Very often they wouldn't even know that's what it was that they were hearing, right? They just, it's because it's just become part of something that I do. all of that, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, was to create an opening, to create a new possibility for our lives going forward. Step 6 is the continuation of that possibility. So in step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove those character defects, right? Are we ever entirely ready to have God remove those character defects? I feel like the answer to that is almost always no. I'm almost never entirely ready to have God remove those character defects. Because I feel like if I was, they'd all be gone. And here's what I know. I know from experience that I still have every character defect I've ever inventoried. It's a fact. They're all still there. I don't act out on them nearly as often, most of the time, as I've done in the past. Some of them I feel like I've mastered to some extent. They just don't show up in my life anymore. And then as soon as I think that, I see it in some other new perverse way, But I feel like as long as I'm a living, breathing human being, I'm going to have these character defects. Because the thing that we learned in the inventory, the thing that I learned in my inventory, was that part of this whole thing is that the behavior and desires are driven by instincts that aren't going anywhere. They're driven by the very instincts that God gave me in order to survive on this planet. They're driven by my desire to be liked and accepted by other people, my desire to have sex, and my desire to feel secure. They're driven by those things that are necessary for my survival. And so, because my character defects are driven by those very things that are necessary for my survival, I am always going to indulge further than what is necessary for my survival, or what does the 12 and 12 say? What is possible or due me? Right? I'm always going to go further than that. Not always going to go further. I'm going to always be tempted to go further than that. I'll always be tempted to go further than that. And if I'm always tempted to go further than that, I will often indulge as well, either in thought or action. And so when AA says we are not saints, they mean it. They mean it. We are not saints. The best we're ever going to get. But here's the thing. In this process, what's happened is I've learned a way to see the truth about myself. I've learned to share that truth with somebody else so that I'm called up to it and I'm accountable to it in a way that I'm not otherwise. And I've been asked in step 6 to be ready to have it removed, right? To look at it squarely, see how it's not serving me, or very often not serving the people that I love, and be willing to let it go and to be willing to move towards something else. Sometimes the something else is obvious. It's the opposite of whatever it is that I'm doing, right? And sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes it's just making some new choice that's not the old one. And sometimes I make a new choice that's not the old one, and I step in shit. And that's okay, right? Because I can inventory. I can confess, right? I can take another stab. You're right, I can become ready to have it removed, and I can go, okay, well, that didn't work out so well either. Let's try this instead, right? That's the possibility, right? That's the possibility that we have. And so step 6 is this taking what we've learned in steps 4 and 5 and creating the possibility of moving from it towards God's will for us. It is, in my experience, here we are. We're in a conversation about step 6, and I can't even finish this conversation without talking about step 7. I really can't, because 6 and 7 are really that married to each other. It's very, very difficult for me. I know some other people can do it, but because what are you left with then? Well, I mean, from that position, from the position of recognizing who and what I really am, right, and having a sincere attempt to have God take me to what he can be, right? What is the rest of that? The rest of that is what could God's will possibly be for me, and to ask God from that position of humility, because that's really what we have. The reason why step 7 in the 12 and 12 is all about humility is because the first 6 steps have finally placed me in a position of humility. Right? Humility was defined in step 5 as a clear recognition of who and what I really am, followed by a sincere attempt to become what I can be. And in step 6, that's exactly where I am. At step 6, I'm in a position of humility. And some of this I have to save for next week. So here, but this part I'm going to share with you tonight. I'll probably share this again next week. So here's the thing. Most of what I've learned, most of what I've experienced practicing the steps, I don't know why it is. Maybe it's because I got such a slow start, or maybe it's because I'm just thick. But most of this I've learned the hard way. Most things, AA has not come easy to me. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous has not come easy to me. And it's not because the directions aren't clear. It's not because I didn't have good people around me, not only with information, but demonstrating the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's got to be because I'm thick. It's got to be. I don't know how else. Because here's. I was around really good, solid, big book people, right? When I did this process the way the book laid it out. And I still got through steps 6 and 7 and gave it up to God. Like 6 and 7, and I had heard this, by the way. So I was aware of this conversation. 6 and 7 had been put to me in using language that I'm about to say to you. And I heard that language and would even repeat that language, but still experientially practiced it that way, right? And so Joe and Charlie at the Big Book Seminar said that 6 and 7 are not steps that we give to God. That's sort of like what most of our experience, like a lot of us get to 6 and 7 and we think, okay, well, when God's ready to remove character defects, he'll remove them, as if they're his steps to do and not mine, right? And then they say something to the effect of, God created the world in 6 days and then he rested. And nowhere in that big book does it say that God went back to work. If there's going to be any work done around here, it's going to be done by you and me, right? That's the way that they put it, right? I heard that conversation. I understood what they said. I even could repeat that while talking about that part of the big book. And yet, experientially, I moved on to step 8 and completely disregarded the work that's to be done in 6 and 7. The repeated work that's to be done. The whole, and not just 6 and 7, but 4, 5, 6 and 7. The whole thing that got me to the point where I could, I was so anxious. I heard people in AA say you don't graduate from this thing, right? But even then, I wanted to graduate this thing. I wanted to get my 9th step complete. And I know when I'm done with step 9, I have the promises, and I must be done after that. It must be, there must be something. I don't know. I'm always going to something, and I lost in that the reality that this program is not a bunch of individual things. It's one thing that we learn to do and we learn to incorporate in our life, and that's the way that the program works. I want to get done with the steps before, move on to the next one, so that I can get to that place where I'm not going to have to worry about this anymore. That's a fantasy land. If you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, you just got to understand, whether you're new or been around for a while, it doesn't work that way. We're never done, right? Because of one line in the big book that I've learned to love. As I grew near to him, he disclosed himself to me. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is the action of drawing near to a power greater than myself. And it's only when I'm doing it, it's only when I'm participating in the process of recovery that he's disclosing himself to me. It's never something that's happened in the past. That's always the way I want it to be. I want to be done. I want it to be, I hit that, now I can coast. And I'm a big coaster, and we'll talk about that later too. But here's the reality. I'm sitting at my home group for months and months and months and months and months, having been through the steps and not really on my game, practicing the steps as a way of life. And it comes home to me at 6 and 7, because one day I'm at my home group and we're on it was a 12 and 12 study before the Big Book study, and we were either on step 6 or step 7. But as you know, we always talk about both when we're on either one. And and of course, like all the old timers in our group, the group gurus, they were all away at like a Big Book study or something like that. And of course, in their absence, I do Brian, which is to have my hand up first and take control of everything because I want to be that guy. Yeah. So yeah, I can't tell. So of course I share, about all these character defects, I had when I was drinking and before I did the steps, and then when I shut up, every one of my peers in AA, everyone that I grew up with in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know what they did? They all shared about character defects that they have, the ones that they deal with today. And there was a sharp contrast in my conversation and their conversation. My conversation revealed that I thought that I had it in my head that all of this was in the past. And their conversation revealed that this work is never done. It's ongoing, and it's what they're dealing with that day. And it was like a 2x4 hit me in the head. And I realized, what I realized was this, that I think it's the 4th step or the 5th step in the 12 and 12 that says, when we found our shoes, we stepped into them, right? That's not what I did. I found my shoes in 4 and 5, and maybe even a little in 6 and 7, and then I stuck them in the back of the closet, never to be seen again. Experientially, that's how I was trying to do this thing, and it doesn't work. And until I put those shoes on my feet and had my character defects now, only from there could I ask God to take me to something better. That's how the program works. I can't pretend I'm not that way anymore. I can't go, isn't it glad that all of that is over with now? I never have to be that guy. I don't know. The truth of the matter is, I did not discover how I was in step 4. I discovered how I am. Right? And it's how I am that I take to God and ask to change. Right? I can't take who I was to God and ask Him to change. I have to take who I am. And so 6 and 7 require me to be current in my inventory and to be current in my confession so that I can seek God's will for my life and from where I am, ask Him to take me to something better. Right? And the other part of that I was missing was that it was up to me to have an imagination about what God's will is for me. Without, yes, in AA we inventory things that we've done wrong and things that that are bad, right, quote unquote bad, right? But it was up to me to think about and ask, what else is possible? How would God have me be in this situation that I've just admitted that I've messed up, right? How would God have me be? And to have some meditation and some thoughtful contemplation on what it is that God's will is for me. Until I started doing that, I wasn't really seeking God's will for my life. I wasn't going to get there only by inventory and confession. I had to actually consider, how would God have me think and be? And until I started thinking about how God would have me be, based on what I've done in the past, what would He have me be? I started to have some imagination about what a new life in God's will would be like. And some thought and some intuition even about what that might be, like what I should do in a specific instance. But it took time. It took getting clear and trying to stay clear about the past, like have the past be, the 4th and 5th step is great because we finally for the first time put the past in the past, right? But 6 and 7 is about having it stay there, so that I'm in a place of choice. I mean, this was good news. I mean, this is the good news and the bad news about Alcoholics Anonymous. The good news and the bad news about Alcoholics Anonymous is I still have all of these character defects, right? That's the good news and the bad news. But it's better, I've learned the hard way, it's much better to have character defects than to have character defects have me, which is the way that it's always been. I've always been completely blind to what has been driving me. I've always not been unconscious of the selfishness and dishonesty in my life that has driven me to behave and think and act the way that I do. I've always been unconscious of it. AA is about staying conscious about it so that I can make a choice. A choice. I've never had a choice before AA. If you think about it, I never had a choice. The guy who was defiant and wouldn't let anybody tell me what to do or think, or that guy, he's full of it. He's full of it because I've never had a choice. My life has been absolutely driven by those instinctual drives and nothing else. And I've been completely blind, completely unconscious to the very things that have been driving my behavior and my thinking and my whole way of looking at the world. I've been completely blind. For the first time, Alcoholics Anonymous has awakened me to those instincts and how they're playing a role in my life so that I have the possibility of a choice, of some new occurrence in my life, right? Because God can meet me where I'm, at step 7, God can meet me there and I can be shown what his will is for me. I can move from there to something else, right? But it's only when I'm willing to be there, to be exactly who and how I am and ask from there that I ever have the possibility of doing anything new. And believe me, the smallest things I've learned that I can do that are new and towards God's will make the biggest difference in the experience of my life. That's what the possibility of 6 and 7 is. And I'm out of time, and we're going to talk more about that next week. Thanks.
Wow.
Thank you, Brian. That was excellent. And